In the heart of San Francisco's billion-dollar boom, a silent army of tents has turned its gleaming streets into a desperate battleground for human survival. As the morning fog lifts, the city's grand cable cars and tech-fueled skyscrapers loom overhead, almost mocking the fragile tents below. How did a place celebrated for innovation become ground zero for a human tragedy? Let's unpack the numbers, the systems, and the failures that brought us here. Current situation. By the 2024 point-in-time count, San Francisco recorded 8,323 individuals experiencing homelessness on a single night, while more than 20,000 unique people accessed shelters. Drop-in centers, or outreach services over the year. Over half, 52%, slept in makeshift encampments on streets, in parks, and beneath freeway underpasses. Despite an expansion of shelter beds to 3,969 since 2015, neighborhood hotspots like Tenderloin, Soma, and the Mission District have become focal points for visible encampments, while smaller clusters dot the dog parks, vacant lots, and vestiges of old industrial zones. Before we dive deeper, if you find this deep dive valuable, hit the like button, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more eye-opening stories. In covering this crisis for our next travel documentary segment, it's clear that numbers alone only scratch the surface of a complex human drama. The rise in homelessness has outpaced the city's ability to house people. While shelter capacity grew by more than 64% over the last decade, the influx of newly unhoused individuals, driven by skyrocketing rents and socioeconomic shifts, has remained relentless. Tents spilling onto sidewalks have become part of the daily commute for many, and encampment sweeps often shift rather than solve the problem. What does it say about our priorities when the city spends millions on clearing camps but too little on keeping families housed? This surge of visible homelessness is not an isolated quirk of San Francisco. It reflects broader national trends exacerbated by gentrification, stagnant wages, and inadequate social services. Yet nowhere has the contrast between extreme wealth and profound need been starker. Is this the inevitable outcome when urban prosperity is measured only in stock market gains and property values, rather than in human well-being? Understanding these figures raises a more pressing question. What factors drive people into homelessness in the first place? Let's explore the root causes next. Causes. At the top of the list is the staggering cost of housing. San Francisco's median rent now exceeds $3,000 per month, and households earning up to $110 annually may still qualify as low income, yet find themselves priced out of any available unit. Skyrocketing property values, fueled by the tech boom, have rendered affordable housing projects an afterthought, squeezed by development fees and protracted permitting processes. Inclusionary zoning policies have struggled to keep pace with demand, leading to a cityscape dominated by luxury condos while essential workforce housing lags behind. Could rising rents alone explain why families and seniors wind up on the streets? Next is gentrification paired with a critical shortage of supply. Historic neighborhoods that once housed working-class communities have been transformed into high-end enclaves. Longtime residents are forced to relocate farther and farther out, sometimes losing community ties that once offered vital informal support networks. Large-scale developments focus on high-margin units for investors, leaving little incentive for builders to include affordable options. This imbalance between supply and demand is a primary engine of homelessness in a city where vacancy rates hover near zero. Compounding the housing crisis is a public health emergency of its own making: untreated mental illness and substance use disorders. Many individuals living in encampments struggle with conditions ranging from chronic depression to severe addiction. Fragmented service delivery and underfunded treatment centers mean that getting off the streets often feels impossible. Sweeps, the city's tactic of clearing camps, displace people without connecting them to stable housing or wraparound care, perpetuating a cycle of trauma and displacement. What does it accomplish to dismantle a tent encampment if the underlying health issues remain unaddressed? Finally, policy failures and administrative hurdles have made coping strategies feel like bureaucratic mazes. Emergency rental assistance programs aim to prevent evictions, but onerous documentation requirements and slow processing times often leave families scrambling. Directives meant to streamline street outreach have sometimes resulted in overlapping responsibilities and gaps in accountability, with public agencies vying for limited budgets and grants. Residents too frequently fall through the cracks. Finally, policy failures and administrative hurdles have made coping strategies feel like bureaucratic mazes. Emergency rental assistance programs aim to prevent evictions, but onerous documentation requirements and slow processing times often leave families scrambling. Directives meant to streamline street outreach have sometimes resulted in overlapping responsibilities and gaps in accountability, with public agencies vying for limited budgets and grants. Residents too frequently fall through the cracks. As these forces collide, soaring rents, gentrification, health crises, and policy delays, the human toll rises. Each statistic represents a person or family pushed to the brink, hoping for relief that remains just out of reach. Now that we've explored the root causes, let's examine how social safety nets and government interventions are responding to the challenge. Social safety nets. San Francisco's network of social safety nets reads like an elaborate patchwork quilt, stitched together by nonprofit agencies, municipal departments, and volunteer groups, but worn thin by the city's relentless homeless crisis. At its center sits the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP, which channels state and federal funds to prevent evictions before they happen. In neighborhoods like Bayview and the Mission, community centers have reported that nearly 80% of their ERAP applicants avoid displacement entirely, underscoring how crucial early financial intervention can be. Yet the application process remains daunting. Proof of income, landlord cooperation, and a maze of paperwork often mean that the people who need help most miss the narrow window of opportunity. Layered on top of ERAP is Home by the Bay 2023 to 2028, a 5-year strategic plan that marshals data and community feedback to set targets for reducing street homelessness by 25%. It outlines quarterly benchmarks for opening non-congregate shelters, increasing housing vouchers, and tracking exits to permanent housing. Each quarter, the mayor's office releases a public scorecard showing progress, or the lack thereof, so residents can hold leaders accountable. In theory, this level of transparency should build trust. But some advocates argue that it simply highlights the gap between promises and lived reality. How do you measure human dignity on a spreadsheet? Operating alongside these programs is the San Francisco Homeless Outreach Team, SFHOT, which dispatches multidisciplinary crews, social workers, nurses, and peer counselors to the city's most entrenched encampments 7 days a week. These teams provide on-site case management, link individuals to medical care, and offer referrals to mental health and substance use treatment. On any given morning, you might find a nurse administering flu shots under a freeway overpass, or a peer counselor handing out bus passes so someone can attend their first outpatient appointment. In this travel documentary journey through the underbelly of the city, these outreach workers often become the only consistent human connection for people living on the margins. Yet despite these efforts, service delivery remains fragmented. Medical care, legal assistance for landlord disputes, and job training programs operate under different bureaucracies with separate eligibility criteria. A person seeking help might visit 3 different offices across town before landing the right referral, by which point motivation and hope can wither. Grassroots groups have experimented with one-stop, pop-up clinics that roll all services into a mobile van, from primary care to housing intake. These pilot projects have shown promising engagement rates, suggesting that convenience may be the missing link in an otherwise robust system. But can scattered pilots scale up to serve thousands of people every day? For a travel documentary that seeks to shine a light on human resilience, these safety nets represent both lifelines and fault lines, while a wrap prevents thousands from ever losing a roof. And as Fachodi meets people where they are, the system seems show whenever data lags, funding dries up, or coordination breaks down. Trust can erode as quickly as tents are swept, and partnerships falter when grants expire. In a city that prides itself on innovation, the persistence of encampments suggests that high-tech solutions alone cannot solve deeply human problems. This network of social services offers a lifeline. But can government policy truly keep pace with the crisis? Next, we'll examine the solutions implemented by city leadership. Governments implemented solutions. In response to mounting public pressure, city leaders have rolled out a series of targeted initiatives to bolster shelter capacity and streamline outreach. By the summer of 2025, San Francisco committed to adding 300 new interim beds dedicated to individuals grappling with substance use disorders and mental health challenges, bringing the total funded by voter-approved Proposition C to 1,500. These specialized shelters focus not only on a cot and a meal, but on integrating counseling, medication management, and peer-led support groups under one roof. The city's Department of Public Health reports that participants in these programs are 40% less likely to return to unsheltered homelessness within a year, a metric that signals real progress in breaking the cycle of repeated displacement. Complementing the expansion of beds is the so-called Directive 100 Days, a policy overhaul that consolidated outreach offices, clarified roles, and imposed clear performance targets for clearing long-standing encampments. In practice, this meant merging duplicate case management teams, standardizing data entry across agencies, and establishing a weekly command center that tracks each crew's progress against removal and rehousing goals. The directive obliges teams to offer at least 2 permanent housing referrals before any sweep, under penalty of fines for noncompliance. Critics argue that this directive risks incentivizing swift sweeps over sustained engagement. But supporters counter that structure and accountability can salvage lives before they drift too far into crisis. Could these measures, born out of urgency, make a real dent in the crisis? Further, the city has embraced innovative shelter models to reduce reliance on sweeps that merely displace people. Interim housing sites repurpose vacant warehouses and former office buildings into temporary dormitories, complete with shared kitchens and private storage lockers. Tiny home villages. Clusters of insulated micro-cabins provide a modicum of privacy and security while offering wraparound services on-site. In the Bayview District, one such village has become a template for humane encampment management. Residents receive life skills classes, job placement assistance, and even performance stipends for community cleanup work. The success of these villages has prompted additional funding to double the number of units by late 2025. Amid these local efforts, San Francisco's lawsuit to preserve $56 million in HUD funds taken at the federal level has garnered national attention. The suit argues that abrupt funding cuts violate statutory commitments to persons with disabilities and seniors, potentially pushing 2,000 households back to the brink. A favorable ruling would not only restore critical rental assistance and emergency shelter cash, but signal to other municipalities that federal backstops cannot be pulled at a whim. This legal gambit underscores how fragile the homeless service ecosystem can be when dependent on shifting political winds. This is a chapter that even our travel documentary cameras have struggled to capture. A city simultaneously building humane alternatives and battling policy setbacks. As these programs unfold, San Francisco's leaders must ask whether incremental gains can outpace the forces that drive people into crisis. With these initiatives in motion, it's time to consider bold proposals that could reshape the future. Proposed solutions. When the cameras stop recording, the question remains, what systemic changes would truly end street homelessness in San Francisco? Advocates point to housing first on a grand scale, a philosophy that places people into permanent, affordable homes before addressing other issues. Imagine 10 000 new units of deeply affordable housing created through inclusionary zoning mandates that require developers to set aside a percentage of units at below market rates. Coupled with expedited permitting and fee waivers for affordable projects, this approach could shift the supply curve, making housing security the presumption rather than the exception. What would it mean to prioritize permanent housing over temporary fixes? Beyond raw housing stock, comprehensive support must be woven into every lease. One model proposes embedding case managers and on-call social workers into housing developments, ensuring that residents retain access to mental health care, addiction treatment, and job training without leaving home. A pilot in Oakland, funded by a public-private partnership, showed a 60% reduction in emergency department visits among formerly homeless tenants, suggesting real cost savings for the healthcare system. Translating that pilot to San Francisco's scale could prevent hospitalizations and foster stability, but only if funding matches ambition. Data integration emerges as another cornerstone of the proposed roadmap. Today, street outreach teams, shelter operators, and housing authorities often maintain separate databases. Combining these systems into a unified homelessness management information system (HMIS) would allow real-time tracking of who enters and exits services, the duration of stays, and outcomes achieved. Better data means smarter resource allocation, clearer performance metrics, and the ability to identify and replicate successful interventions. In this travel documentary lens on urban policy, the unsung hero is not the camera crew, but the coder who links these disparate streams of information. Of course, policy alone won't suffice without community buy-in. Proposals to expand a RAP further, doubling rental assistance caps and streamlining landlord incentives, could prevent new cases of homelessness before they start. But to persuade property owners to participate, the city could offer tax credits or liability protections that reduce perceived risks. Meanwhile, volunteer networks and faith-based organizations can mobilize neighbors to welcome new residents, dispelling myths about crime or property devaluation through grassroots education campaigns. When an apartment building opens its doors to formerly unhoused families, the real work begins in building social cohesion, not just brick and mortar. Critically, funding these proposals will require creativity. San Francisco could channel a portion of its soaring sales tax revenue from tourism and tech payroll taxes into a dedicated housing opportunity fund. At the same time, philanthropic foundations and impact investors stand ready to provide low-interest loans for affordable projects. By blending public finance, private capital, and community contributions, the city can underwrite large-scale solutions without relying solely on ballot measures that face voter fatigue. For a travel documentary that seeks not only to expose, but to inspire, these proposals paint a portrait of what is possible when moral urgency meets policy innovation. Though ambitious, they rest on evidence from peer cities and emerging pilots, offering a roadmap for lasting change. Though these proposals offer a roadmap, their impact depends on community engagement and fundings, leading us to a final reflection. San Francisco's homeless crisis is neither inevitable nor unfixable. The data are clear. Every dollar spent on prevention and permanent housing yields savings in emergency services, healthcare, and criminal justice. Every tent cleared without a plan for placement signifies a missed opportunity to break the cycle of despair. And every person who finds a stable home rather than a temporary cot becomes proof that policy, when rooted in compassion, can overcome neglect. As viewers of our channel, we witness not just a city at odds with itself, but a moment of choice where leadership, community, and individual resolve can tilt the scales toward dignity. 28. It is up to residents, advocates, and elected officials alike to demand the policies that work: rapid rehousing, integrated care, data-driven accountability, and large-scale, affordable construction. We must reject the notion that homelessness is a necessary byproduct of urban success, and insist instead that measuring prosperity includes counting roofs over heads. Could San Francisco become the first post-homelessness city in America? The blueprint exists. The question is whether we have the will to follow it. See you in the next episode.